The council station floated in the black ocean of space, shining like a crown made of steel and glass. Ships from 5 alien empires circled around it, each one built to impress, each one built to frighten. Their cannons glowed faintly with energy. Their shields shimmered with power, and their hulls gleamed with pride. Inside the council chamber, the 5 alien leaders stood tall. They wore armor covered in bright symbols, and their voices filled the air with arrogance. One after another, they spoke about their ships. They called them unstoppable. They called them unbreakable. They laughed as they remembered past battles, where their fleets crushed their enemies. The first alien, tall with green scales, pointed to a massive warship outside the window. "This is the Serpent Fang," he said with pride. "Its plasma cannons can melt moons in hours." His words echoed in the chamber, and the other aliens nodded in respect. The second alien, covered in thick fur and heavy armor, slammed his fist against the table. "My fleet has shattered whole planets," he boasted. "Our warship, the Iron Fang, carries enough missiles to darken the stars." The hall shook with his roar, and his people cheered loudly. The third alien, with silver skin and glowing eyes, spoke softly but with power. "Your ships are strong, but none can outmatch the Sun Spear. Its energy core burns hotter than a star. It cuts through fleets as if they were paper." The chamber grew silent as the image of his ship appeared on the great screens, shining like a burning comet. The fourth alien, whose body was covered in sharp bone plates, hissed with laughter. "All your fleets are fine, but our warship, the Death Fang, is the end of all enemies. Our shields cannot be broken, and our weapons never miss. We are perfection." Finally, the fifth alien, wearing golden robes, raised his hands as if calling for worship. "Behold our ship, the Eternal Flame," he declared. "It has ruled the stars for 1,000 years. It is not just a warship, it is a god among machines. No enemy has ever seen it and lived to tell." The chamber filled with cheers, alien voices rising in pride and madness. Together, the 5 empires laughed. Their voices shook the walls. Their pride filled the air, and their eyes burned with arrogance. They believed no one could challenge them. They believed their fleets ruled the galaxy forever. Then, one alien turned his gaze to the far corner of the chamber. A small group of humans stood there quietly, dressed in simple uniforms, no golden armor, no shining jewels, no grand banners, just plain, calm humans watching in silence. The alien with scales laughed first. "Humans," he hissed, "what ships do you bring? Fishing boats? Cargo haulers? Perhaps you ride the stars with wings like insects?" The others laughed with him, their voices cruel and mocking. The fur-covered alien leaned forward, his teeth sharp like blades. "Tell us, little humans, how do you expect to stand among us? We have destroyed empires older than your species. We have crushed fleets larger than your planet. What can you bring?" The humans said nothing. They simply stood, calm as stone. Their faces showed no anger, no fear, only quiet patience. The alien with glowing eyes narrowed his stare. "Why so silent? Are you ashamed? Do you realize your weakness at last?" His words were sharp, like knives cutting into the silence. Still, the humans said nothing. Finally, the human ambassador stepped forward. He was not tall, not powerful looking, not glowing with energy or wrapped in armor. He was just a man in a plain black uniform. He spoke in a steady voice. "We do not boast," he said simply. "We will let our ship speak." The chamber fell into silence. The aliens froze. Then they burst into laughter. Their voices filled the air once more, louder than before. The idea that humans could bring a ship to match theirs was too funny, too impossible. Let their ship speak? One alien mocked. "Then it will whisper its weakness before we break it. Perhaps it is so small we cannot see it," another said, roaring with cruel laughter. "Or perhaps it is so fragile, a single shot will tear it apart," shouted the fur-covered alien. The humans did not answer. They did not argue. They simply waited, calm and still. The laughter echoed for long minutes, like a storm of arrogance. The 5 alien leaders stood taller, proud, and sure of their victory. Then, slowly, the laughter began to fade. Outside the windows, in the dark of space, something stirred. A shadow touched the edge of the station, vast and silent. It grew larger, darker, and closer, until even the proud alien eyes began to widen. The humans remained still, saying nothing. But their silence now felt heavier. It was no longer the silence of weakness. It was the silence of power waiting to be revealed. The aliens shifted in their seats, their pride not gone but shaken for the first time. The shadow kept growing, blocking out the stars. It was still unseen, still hidden, but its presence pressed against the hearts of all who watched. The human ambassador's voice came again. Calm and steady. Soon, he said, you will see. And in that moment, even before the human warship arrived, the laughter of the 5 alien empires had already begun to die. The proud mood inside the council chamber grew even louder as the 5 empires began to show their strength. The green-scaled commander opened a live channel to the Serpent Fang, and a giant screen filled with the image of a dark warship that moved like a living beast. It slid through space with smooth coils of armor, leaving ripples of charged particles in its wake. At his signal, the cannons along its spine unlocked and pushed forward like fangs. A beam of blue-white fire cut across empty space to strike a dead moon kept near the station for tests. The moon's surface boiled, mountains sank, and a ring of glass formed where a rock had been. The scaled commander smiled with thin lips and said that the Serpent Fang could aim those beams for days without rest. He said the ship could drink the heat of stars and turn it into weapons. He said any fleet that stood in its path would melt before it could scream. His officers behind him lifted their chins and tapped their chests. Their armor rang like bells, and the sound felt like a challenge. The hall answered with a low roar of approval. Pride rolled like thunder from one balcony to the next, and the lights caught on the golden crests of his empire, as if they were tiny suns. The fur-covered warlord refused to be second in fame. He shouted a code word, and the Iron Fang appeared on the screen. It looked like a mountain wrapped in steel, broad and heavy and full of teeth. The warlord ordered a missile drill. The ship opened a dozen armored doors, and rows of missiles slid forward like spears in a giant hand. They launched in a smooth wave, then split into smaller waves, then split again into swarms of little hunters that wove around each other without crashing. The screen showed the drones of the council station trying to dodge, but the missiles relocked in less than a breath. They struck and blossomed into silent fire that pushed the drones away like toys. The warlord laughed and explained that each missile thought for itself. He said one carried a shield, one carried a jammer, one carried a cutter, and together they acted like a pack of wolves. He struck the table again and promised that the Iron Fang could end the battle before the enemy learned the rules. His people cheered as if they stood on a parade ground, and the air filled with the smell of their metal banners heating under the lights. The silver-skinned seer smiled in a quiet way that seemed even more proud. He spoke softly, and the room leaned in. The sun spear appeared on the screen, long and bright and sharp like its name. It did not roar or throw out smoke. It glowed. Seer asked the station to release a shielded target platform, and a thick slab of armor drifted into view. The sun spear did not fire a cannon. It did not launch a missile. It pulsed. For a second the platform looked normal, then every sensor in the hall flashed red. On the screen, the slab became soft like wax and then smooth like water and then nothing at all. The seer said the sun spear tuned its core to the secret rhythm of matter. He said it spoke to atoms and told them to stop holding hands. He said no shield could block a voice that went through every layer at once. He ended with a simple line that felt like a blade. If the sun spear wished for silence, a fleet would answer with silence. The hall did not cheer this time. It breathed out as one. The fear was sweet to the silver-skinned crew, and they closed their shining eyes as if to taste it. The bone-plated general hissed, eager to take back the noise. The death fang rose on the screen like a cliff, covered in jagged plates that shifted and locked with tiny clicks. The general ordered a rain of fire from a practice battery hidden behind the station. Bright lances hammered the death fang, but its armor moved like a puzzle that always solved itself. Plates slid, angles changed, force spread. Damage numbers crawled along the screen and then fell to zero as repair spiders raced under the plates. The general showed how the ship's targeting picked out weak joints in enemy hulls and how its rail needle stabbed at those same joints again and again. He described fire that curved to follow heat. He described minds that were small as dust, but sharp as truth. He finished by saying the death fang did not chase glory. It chased ends. The general's soldiers scraped their bone plates together in a sound like hail, and they grinned with too many teeth. Last came the golden priest. He did not ask for a test. He asked for silence. The eternal flame drifted into the display like a temple carried by light. Its hull was old and perfect. Its engines did not flare. They glowed like calm coals. The priest said the ship held relics from 1,000 years of victory. He said its shield was a prayer that never stopped. He said the flame could hold a star inside its heart for a day and not burn. He spoke of enemies who begged to join his faith rather than fight. He told of a siege that lasted a year and ended in a single hour when the flame opened its eye. No blast, he said. Only a word said in the language of power. The enemy listened and fell apart. The priest spread his hands and declared that no machine or mind had ever broken the eternal flame, and none ever would. Golden dust fell from his sleeves, tiny motes that caught the light and floated like sparks. The crowd watched the motes and saw in them a promise that never failed. When the five finished, the hall was full of heat. Pride climbed the glass ribs of the chamber like fire up a tree. The aliens slapped backs and traded bold speech. They told each other that this demonstration would end all doubts in the galaxy. They spoke as if they already held every star in their fists. They spoke as if war was a sport and victory a habit. No one looked toward the human corner for long, and when someone did, it was only to smirk. The words that passed between balconies were sharp and easy. Humans were newcomers. Humans were loud dreamers. Humans were brave in stories and quiet in facts. The five empires agreed on little, but they agreed on this. Humanity did not belong in the circle where giants spoke out by the station windows. The trails of the weapon tests still glowed like scars across the dark. The empires loved those scars. They looked at them the way hunters look at fresh tracks. They saw proof that power lived in their ships and in their hands, and they were sure that the rest of the night would be a feast of more proof. Yet a small change moved through the chamber. It did not come from a sound or a light. It came from the space that had once been laughing. The emptiness where jokes had echoed now felt too big. The last of the cheers faded quicker than expected. A few eyes turned back to the humans and did not turn away. They noticed the way the human officers stood without shifting. They noticed the way the human ambassador's hands stayed loose. They noticed that no one in the human group had touched a screen or whispered into a mic. It was as if they were not worried about time or pressure or attention. It was as if they had already heard the end of a song the others could not yet hear. The five leaders felt it too, but would not speak of it. They told themselves it was nothing. They told themselves the night still belonged to them. They told themselves that the shadow outside the glass was only a trick of tired eyes. He did not look like a legend. He did not act like a hero. He breathed, he watched, and he waited. That was all. The officers near him, a woman with a thin scar on her jaw and a man with a gray streak in his hair, stood the same way. Their boots were clean but not polished. Their jackets were plain. Their eyes were bright and careful. They did not fidget. They did not scan the hall for favor. They did not stare down their hosts. They did not try to look strong. The quiet was their shield, and it held. A slow weight settled in the air around them, a pressure that did not feel like fear. It felt like the pause before a door opens, and though none of the human mouths smiled, something like a smile moved. through the group, the kind that begins in the heart when a long plan reaches the moment it was made for. The human calm did not come from arrogance, it came from practice. They had trained for years to stand in rooms like this. They had learned to speak only when words mattered. They had learned to wait while others burned their strength in shows and speeches. They had learned the patience of pilots who hold a line through storms and the patience of engineers who stare at a single number until it tells them the truth. They carried that patience now, and it made them look simple and strong at once. The ambassador kept his eyes on the glass and counted breaths. He thought of the messages that had crossed the dark. He thought of the promises he had made to mothers and children and old friends and young soldiers, promises that said peace if possible, safety if needed, and strength if forced. He had not come to break those promises. He had come to keep them. Even if keeping them meant showing a thing the galaxy was not ready to see. Far from the station, beyond the polite borders set for the Council's tests, a single shape drifted where no sensor should have missed it, and yet every public scan swore there was nothing there. It rested in that quiet place the way a mountain rests beside a lake. The shape was not asleep, it listened. It tasted the thin push of radiation from local stars. It measured the breath of the station. It read the wakes left by the alien ships as a tracker reads dust. It waited for a word from a man in a plain black uniform, a word that would be clear and final and small. The officers with the ambassador knew the shape was there. They knew its long hull and its hidden skin. They knew the numbers that described its heat and weight and depth. They also knew that numbers could not hold it. They knew the way it felt to be under its shadow even when it was far away, a feeling like standing near a cliff and sensing the Earth's age pressed into stone. Inside the chamber, the silver-skinned seer finally leaned toward the humans and asked, in a voice that tried to be casual, whether their ship would arrive soon. The ambassador did not answer at once. He let the question hang. He let the room feel how light it was compared to the heavy thing coming. Then he said that it would be here when it was time for it to be here. The words sounded simple, but they fit into gaps that had opened in every mind. They found a way into fear and pride alike. The fur-covered warlord snorted and tried to laugh again. The bone-plated general clicked his armor and looked away. The priest let more golden dust fall from his sleeves, as if he could keep the old glow alive by shaking out the last sparks. The scaled commander opened his mouth to mock, but he found no new words. He found only the ones he had already used, and they felt tired. The ambassador kept his hands at his sides. He did not look at the 5 leaders. He watched the stars instead. The officers around him took one more breath together and fell still again. The station's clocks ticked without sound. The air systems pushed gentle wind through high vents. Banners stirred and fell. A small drone crossed the air near the ceiling and blinked a blue eye. It noticed nothing, not the change in mood, not the weight of waiting. Outside, the shadow at the edge of vision grew by a measure too fine for screens built by others. The humans did not need those screens. They felt the approach in the soles of their boots and in the bones of their wrists. They felt it as a sailor feels tied under a wooden deck, and the sense filled them with the calm that comes when a task finally reaches the hour written for it. He thought of the words he would say when the ship took its place. He practiced them without moving his lips. He cut them shorter in his head. He made them cleaner. He made them true. He had learned that simple words carry farther in big rooms. He had learned that a voice that does not shake can open a door that force cannot. He planned to open that door, and he planned to leave it open behind him when he walked out. The 5 empires had shown their weapons. They had shown their clever tricks and their old pride. Now he would show something else, not to humiliate them, but to set a line they would not cross again. He wanted trade more than battle. He wanted music more than missiles. He wanted a future where fear did not lead, but if fear needed a lesson first, he would teach it. He did not hate them for making him teach. He only hoped they would listen. The hall did not know why its light seemed softer. It did not know why sound seemed to sink into the floor. It did not know why the stars beyond the glass felt fewer and more near. But it felt all these things, and so did the 5 leaders, and so did their guards and aides and pilots. They felt the start of a story they had not written, and while none of them would admit it yet, each one began to wonder how it would end. The ambassador did not wonder. He had already seen the last page, not in visions or dreams, but in plans and math and metal. He waited for the page to turn. He waited for the shadow to step fully into the light. He waited for the room to learn the difference between loud pride and quiet power. He waited, and the calm did not break. The human delegation remained steady while the echoes of pride still clung to the high glass and steel. The ambassador let the room breathe and kept his voice inside his chest. He looked at his officers, and they looked back with the same calm. The woman with the thin scar nodded a little. The man with the gray streak folded his hands behind his back. Another officer, young and quiet, watched the screens without moving his eyes too fast. They had trained to do this, to hold space with patience, to speak only when the words could change a path. The aliens did not understand this kind of strength because it made no noise. It did not throw light or fire. It did not pound the table. It simply sat like a mountain, and because it did not move, everything around it began to move instead. The scaled commander tried to bait them again with jokes about small engines and soft hulls, but the jokes hung in the air and did not land. The priest raised his hands to bless his eternal flame and waited for another cheer, but the cheer he wanted did not come. The seer kept his shining eyes on the humans and began to listen the way he listened to stars. He felt a rhythm in there. Stillness, slow and even, like the beat of an old drum. The bone-plated general told himself that fear belonged to others. Yet he sent a quiet order for more guards to stand near the exits. The furred warlord rolled his shoulders and forced a grin. But even he could not ignore the way the windows seemed to shade darker, as if the night outside had thickened while no one watched. The ambassador asked for permission to share a brief statement before any further tests, and the council could not refuse. He spoke in clear words without poetry and without threat. He said that humanity did not travel across the dark to make enemies. He said that memory had taught his people to be careful with pride. He said that peace needed honest scales and true measures, and that boasting was a poor measure of anything. He said that a ship was not only guns and shields, it was also promise and purpose and duty, and that the duty of the human ship that waited beyond the test zone was first to protect life, and second to end any fight that could not be avoided. The sentences were simple, each one a brick, and together they stacked into a road that any mind could follow. He did not name the ship. Yet, he did not give numbers or ranges. He did not ask for applause. He only said that when the council was ready to see a different kind of power, the humans were ready to show it. Then he stepped back, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was thick and alive like air before rain. The seer's eyes dimmed for a breath as he listened harder and found that the silence had a shape. The warlord laughed once, short and sharp, but it sounded lonely in the big room. The priest lifted a glowing charm and whispered an old line about humility, though no one near him had heard that word from his mouth in years. The general checked a new stream of data and frowned when his screen told him the ambient gravity near the station had shifted by a number too small to matter and yet too exact to be random. A human technician in a plain jacket walked to a terminal and connected a small case with a cable. She asked the council for permission to calibrate the public sensors so that all readings would be fair. The request was modest and reasonable, and so it passed without protest. Her fingers moved in steady patterns, not fast and not slow. She brought up a star chart and aligned it with the distant beacons that every empire used for navigation. She corrected for tiny errors in the station clock and for drift in one of the external dishes. She did this all in the open, with the screen mirrored on the high walls so every eye could see. There was no trick to catch, only craft. The scaled commander scoffed at the show until his own engineer leaned close and whispered that the human corrections were real and better than the station's best routine. The warlord's missiles could chase anything that moved, but they could chase even better if fed clean numbers, and he knew it. The seer watched the alignment settle into a perfect grid and felt a strange respect for work that left no scent of ego. The general tried to find a flaw and found only careful hands. The priest told himself that good craft was a kind of prayer. The technician closed the case and stepped back without a bow. The ambassador thanked the council for the cooperation and said that accuracy was the friend of trust. He did not say that the calibration also helped the human ship read the room. More clearly, he did not need to. The ones who could guess had already guessed, and the ones who could not guess would not be helped by extra words. With the sensors true, the council requested one more round of demonstrations, and the empires prepared to oblige. The serpent fang traced a thin ribbon of controlled plasma through a debris cluster and turned it into smooth glass. The iron fang split a swarm into 100 smaller swarms and carried out a dance that looked like a storm of iron snow. The sun spear pulsed at a slab of dense armor, but at a setting so low the slab only smoked, and still the room inhaled it. The power in that smoke. The death fang shifted plates and let a rain of kinetic darts dissolve against moving angles. The eternal flame opened a halo of defensive light, and micrometeor dust in the test corridor turned aside as if an unseen hand had brushed it away. The council applauded at each neat display, but the applause had changed. It was shorter, it was thoughtful, it did not roar. The ambassador watched and nodded and remembered the names of the crews. He admired good work even when it belonged to those who might yet stand against his people. He held that thought because it kept him human. The young officer with quiet eyes kept his attention on a different display, a blank section of space. Where his training told him to look, he saw a tiny change in the way starlight bent and knew that the ship beyond the tests had taken a slow breath. He smiled with only his eyes, he did not speak. The scarred officer checked her watch and then checked the window. She felt the old fear any soldier feels before a reveal, the fear of a plan that must be shown to the world. She turned that fear into straight shoulders and a steady jaw. The gray-streaked officer ran a final check on the diplomatic channel that would carry the ambassador's next words to every ship in range. He kept his mind on the simple tasks that must be perfect when big things happen. The council chair, an old mind set inside a body of woven metal and grown bone, asked a calm question that many had been waiting to hear. He asked why humanity had stayed quiet so long if it had a ship worth showing. The ambassador answered in the same clean way as before. He said that strength shouted less when it did not need to prove anything. He said that his people had learned from hard years that surprise could save lives when pride could not. He said that building a great ship was not a test to win, but a duty to bear. And duties were best carried in silence until the moment of real need. He told them that this moment had come because words were no longer enough. He told them that he did not wish to frighten anyone, but that he could not let lies about human weakness steer the future. He finished by saying that the ship they would soon see was not a threat, but a line. A line that said humanity would stand for itself and for its friends, and that beyond that line war would find no easy victory. The chair considered this, and nodded and found in it a logic that felt trustworthy. The seer closed his eyes and saw. In his mind 2 roads, one narrow and one wide, and both led to a place where laughter was not king. The warlord snorted again, but did not laugh. The general let his fingers rest and stopped ordering small tests that would change nothing. The priest lowered his hands and held his charm like a memory. The scaled commander folded his arms and stared at the humans with a new kind of hunger. The hunger a hunter feels when he meets another hunter in the deep woods and wonders who will turn aside first. Outside the glass the night seemed to deepen, not because stars vanished, but because something larger than starlight itself stepped between the council and the old shape of their confidence. The calibrated sensors began to paint a picture that did not match anything in the known files. It was not noise, it was not a ghost. It was a slow wave in gravity, a pressure that touched the station with a weight gentle enough to be polite and exact enough to be deliberate. It was the footprint of mass arranged with care and covered with patience. The whisper moved through the command decks and the private suites and the guard posts. Someone asked if a small moon had drifted near. Someone else said no, because a moon does not think. A child of a delegate pressed a hand to the window and said the stars looked like they were swimming. The human officers did not turn to the window all at once. They allowed themselves one look each, just enough to mark the moment in their minds, and then they put their eyes back on their tasks. The ambassador watched the council and counted 3 long breaths. He said that if the chamber wished for it, the human ship would now take a place where all could see it clearly. He said that it would move slowly and softly, and would keep its weapons asleep and its shields low. He said that no one was in danger. He said that fear was a choice, and that he chose respect. The chair inclined his head. The council agreed. The night at the window thickened again by a small step, and every heart in the room felt the size of the thing that was still for one last minute, not yet seen. Each with its own brain, each with its own trick. Decoys and jammers and cutters and shields dancing together in a cloud that had humiliated a dozen enemies before. The cloud raced toward the mark. The Terran ship did nothing for half the distance. Then a clear sphere grew from its flank like a bubble of clean air. It did not touch the missiles. It did not push them. It simply sat where the math said the cloud must pass. The missiles hit the edge of the sphere and forgot their anger. Not erased, not broken. They forgot. They stopped knowing what to chase, and so they lost the idea of forward. They drifted in calm circles like fish when lightning leaves the water. Controllers aborted the drill and called the missiles home. But the sphere had already opened a smooth path, and the cloud returned like a tired flock. The warlord's jaw worked. And he did not look at the humans, because he did not want them to see the moment when he admitted that their quiet bubble had done more than any flak wall he had ever seen. The priest of the eternal flame sought something holier than force. He asked to sing his shield near the Terran hull to test for harmony or spite. The chamber allowed it. The flame opened its ancient veil and let a low chant hum through space, a gentle field that had turned aside dust and prayer alike for 1,000 years. The Terran ship listened, then answered with a hum so close in tone that the 2 fields braided without a spark. The priest felt tears rise, because for the first time another vessel had not fought his song or mocked it. It had joined, it had honored. He bowed his head and whispered that perhaps the names of gods were big enough for more than one people. The scaled commander had no patience for hymns, and asked the only question he cared about. He wanted numbers. For thrust, numbers for turn, numbers for range. He wanted to know how fast the Terran ship could run and how hard it could hit. The human ambassador gave numbers in simple steps, not to boast but to answer. They were not wrapped in glory. They were plain and heavy. Enough thrust to move a mass like a city as if it were a fighter. Enough range to cross gulfs that most empires mapped in dreams. Enough endurance to keep children and gardens alive for years without a port. He did not list every weapon. He did not need to. The council had eyes. The most shocking number was not a gun. It was the count of hospital, bays and schools, and farms inside the hull. The ship was a fortress, yes, but it was also a town. A promise that power served life before it took it. The seer heard that number and smiled, because it told him more truth than any list of cannons. With pride now quiet, the 5 empires asked for a final set of comparisons that were not drills, but measures of heart. They wanted to know how the Terran ship chose targets, how it set limits, how it decided enough. The ambassador answered with rules instead of boasts. He said the ship would never strike first in anger. He said it would always speak before it raised a hand. He said it tracked risk to civilians as carefully as it tracked enemy guns. He said the command corps was not a single throne for a single mind, but a council of trained officers checked by living law. He said the ship carried machines that thought, but not alone, always with human hands on the same path. He said that victory without mercy was not victory his people would celebrate. He did not say this to sound noble. He said it because his crew had buried friends and learned the difference the hard way. The council felt those rules settle like anchors, and even the warlord who loved clean winds more than clean words could not pretend those rules were weakness. He knew in his bones that a fleet that chose its lines and held them would be harder to trick than any brute who fought for noise. The Death Fang's general asked for the one test he trusted most, a timing run. He wanted to know how fast the Terran ship could see a threat and act. Without weapons, only with grace. The chair set a harmless challenge, tiny drones flitting in a pattern that changed without warning. A dance meant to trip the eyes and fingers of any crew. The Terran ship moved nothing large, only lights along its skin and tiny veins near its flanks. The drones spun, the pattern jumped, and yet the human ship answered each change on the first beat, not late, not early, as if it had been told the music before it began. The general nodded once, the small hard nod of a soldier who has met a worthy line and will not lie about it. The Iron Fang's warlord stared at the timing data and recognized hours of drill behind every heartbeat. He respected drills. He respected the quiet pain of practice. And so against his want he felt respect grow for the humans he had mocked. When the comparisons ended, the room knew the shape of the gap. It was not only size, not only guns, not only tricks. It was discipline. It was design that served purpose. It was patience turned into steel. The 5 empires saw their faces in the Terran hull the way you see yourself in a mirror that shows more than skin. They saw what they were and what they were not. The scaled commander finally found words and asked what the ship was called beyond. Terran warship. The ambassador let a breath go and spoke a name that was simple and old. A name from rivers and storms and long roads. A name that carried work more than legend. He said the name and the ship answered with a single heartbeat of light along its ribs, not bright, only true. The priest whispered the name back and it felt right in his mouth. The seer tasted the math of the name and nodded. The warlord rolled it on his tongue and did not spit it out. The general wrote it in his mind with steady strokes. The ambassador then said the last comparison, the one that mattered. He said that all their ships had been built to win battles, and that his ship had been built to end them, not by burning every enemy, but by making the first shot too costly to fire. He said that if they wished to test that line they could, but he advised them to test something else, to test trade, to test shared maps, to test rescue drills run side by side. He said there was more honor in saving strangers than in counting kills, and he said it with a voice that did not shake. Outside the window, the Terran ship held its place like a mountain that had grown in the night. Inside the chamber, the 5 empires weighed what they had learned and felt the old laughter stir. And then lie down. It did not die, it became something else. A humbler sound that left room for thought. The comparisons had not broken them, they had woken them. And in that waking the galaxy felt wider. The humans did not smile, they did not bow, they did not demand. They waited with the same quiet patience that had carried them across the dark. And the council, for the first time since the meeting began, understood why patience could be the sharpest blade. The chamber carried a weight now that could not be shaken off. And it was no longer the weight of alien pride, but the weight of realization. The comparisons had spoken louder than any laugh, louder than any roar. And the truth had settled like iron in every mind. The Terran warship did not need to prove itself again. It had already shown it stood on a height the 5 empires could not climb. Yet what came next was even more powerful than numbers. For the humans had not crossed the stars only to show might. They had come to speak. And the words they spoke now would decide whether the galaxy remembered this night as the spark of war or the beginning of something new. The ambassador let the silence linger. He wanted every commander, every aide, every listening crew on every balcony to feel how different the air was now than when they had laughed at the start. Then he spoke, not in a shout, but in a steady voice that filled the chamber more deeply than noise ever could. He said that humanity had watched the galaxy for years, watched battles fought for pride, watched fleets burn whole systems because no one dared to yield. He said his people had known war too, and had been broken by it before they ever left their homeworld. He told them that humanity had sworn never to repeat those mistakes among the stars, and that the ship they saw was not built only for fighting, but for preventing fights. He reminded them that restraint was not weakness, that mercy was not fear, that the sharpest sword was the one still sheathed. And as he said this, the giant Terran vessel turned slowly in space, its black alloy catching just a trace of distant starlight like a watchful eye. The scaled commander shifted uneasily and finally admitted in a rough growl that he could not understand why humans, if they had such power, had not conquered. He asked why humanity had waited, why they had come with words instead of chains. The ambassador answered that conquest killed more than it created, that empires built on fear always crumbled when fear found a stronger hand. He said humanity had chosen instead to build allies, to trade, to grow, and to protect, and that this ship was the guarantee of that choice. The Iron Fang's warlord leaned forward, his heavy arms braced on the table, and asked what would happen if someone ignored those choices, if someone tested the line the ambassador had spoken of earlier. The ambassador did not hesitate. He said calmly that humanity would fight, and that the Terran warship was proof that such a fight would not be short or easy or cheap. He said that those who brought war would find no triumph, only ruin. The words were not shouted, yet they rang like hammers in the hearts of all who listened. The silver-skinned seer lifted his gaze, glowing eyes narrowed as if staring beyond the chamber, and asked whether the humans believed themselves chosen. He said that ships like this carried the weight of prophecy in many cultures, and he wished to know if humanity saw itself as more than mortal. The ambassador shook his head. He said humanity was not chosen, not blessed, not destined. They were only survivors who had built their strength with hands, blood, and memory. He said the ship outside was not a god, not a legend, but a tool given shape by the mistakes of the past and the hope for the future. That answer carried more weight than boasting would have, because it spoke of discipline, not destiny. And the seer bowed his head slightly in respect. The bone-plated general rose to his full height, sharp ridges scraping softly against one another, and demanded proof of will. He said ships and rules were nothing without commanders willing to stand in the fire. He asked whether the humans truly had that spirit, or whether they hid behind their machine. At that moment, the scarred officer stepped forward, her voice low but strong. She said she had bled on more battlefields than she cared to count. She said the Terran ship was not her shield. It was her home, and that she would defend it as fiercely as she would defend the smallest child aboard. She let the chamber see the mark on her face, not as shame but as testament, and the general, who respected scars above all, gave a sharp nod and sat again. The gray-streaked officer spoke next, describing his role not as warrior but as keeper of voices. He said the warship carried schools and families because humanity had learned that strength, without life to protect, was hollow, and that he would rather guide children through lessons than fleets through battle, but that he was prepared for both if forced. The chamber listened, and even the hardest hearts felt the truth in those quiet words. The priest of the eternal flame lifted his charm and asked if humanity sought worship, for many in his empire would bow before such a ship. The ambassador shook his head once more. He said humanity sought respect, not worship, peace, not temples. He said they wished for allies who stood as equals, not subjects who bent the knee. The priest looked at the ship outside and realized it was not a god, and that was perhaps more frightening than if it had been, for men could be reasoned with, but they could not be denied. He closed his eyes and whispered that perhaps faith and reason could walk the same road. In the chamber's highest seats, aides and secondary leaders began to murmur, but these were no longer the mocking whispers of before. They were words of caution, of curiosity, of slow respect. The council chair asked for quiet, and then he spoke, saying that he had lived through centuries of war councils, that he had heard every kind of boast, every kind of promise, but that he had never heard words like these. He said he believed the humans had told the truth, and he turned to the other empires and asked whether they wished to gamble against it. None answered with challenge, none laughed, none dared. Outside the window, the Terran warship waited like a mountain among stars. It had not fired a shot. It had not needed to. Its presence was more final than victory, and its silence more commanding than any roar. The 5 empires who had mocked humanity found themselves hushed, not by force, but by understanding. They knew now that humanity was not weak, not foolish, and not alone. For behind that single warship stood a people who had chosen patience. And patience was a weapon sharper than any blade. The meeting that had begun in laughter now trembled on the edge of history, and all who stood in that chamber knew the galaxy would not be the same. The chamber seemed to breathe in unison. Every alien leader, every aide, every guard, every watching officer holding still as though the air itself had frozen. The Terran ship lingered beyond the window like a silent verdict, its colossal frame blotting out the stars, and all who saw it understood that the moment had shifted. Laughter was gone, boasting was gone, and in their place rose the quiet tension of something greater. The human ambassador waited, his calm presence standing against the nervous flickers of pride and fear around him. When he finally spoke, the words were not wrapped in threat, yet they struck with the weight of mountains. He began by saying that humanity had never wished to arrive in this chamber as challengers. He said their voyage across the void was not to demand tribute or to place crowns upon their heads. He said they had come as equals, with open hands, seeking only to stand among the stars without chains. Yet, he admitted, laughter and scorn had greeted them, and for long minutes the 5 empires had mocked humanity's place in the galaxy. The ambassador's voice did not sharpen, it did not rise, but its steadiness carried more power than anger. He reminded them that laughter had ended the moment the Terran warship entered sight. He told them that fear had already replaced arrogance, and that fear could easily turn to war if left unguarded. Then he leaned forward, and in a tone as quiet as drift in snow, he said the truth. Humanity did not want war, but humanity was ready for it. Humanity did not want conquest, but humanity could end it. Humanity did not seek to rule, but humanity would never kneel. The scaled commander clenched his jaw, his eyes fixed on the black hull outside, and asked in a voice far smaller than before what humanity wanted from the empires. The ambassador answered without pause. Humanity wanted respect. Humanity wanted peace that was not dressed in false words, but forged in honest strength. He said the Terran ship was not a message of domination. It was a promise that peace had a guardian. He told them that if the empires sought trade, exploration, or alliance, humanity would meet them with open hands. But if they sought chains, subjugation, or war, then they would meet the Terran fleet, and the laughter of the empires would be silenced forever. The Iron Fang's warlord growled, his pride unwilling to die so easily. He asked what right humanity had to draw such a line when the galaxy had fought and bled long before humans ever touched the stars. The ambassador's answer was calm but sharp. He said that humanity's right was not given by age or conquest, but by survival. He said that his people had endured wars that nearly burned their homeworld to ash, had buried cities under fire and dust, and yet had risen again, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to fall the same way twice. He said the right to stand here did not come from ancient crowns, but from scars. Scars that had been turned into lessons, and lessons that had been forged into steel. The warlord stared and said nothing. For even he, who respected only strength, could not deny the truth of scars. The Sun Spear's seer spoke next, his glowing eyes softer than before. He asked whether humanity's ship was the first of its kind or merely one among many. It was a question meant to measure, but also to glimpse hope or dread. The ambassador did not give details, but his answer carried its own weight. He said that humanity never showed its full hand in the first game. He said that the ship they saw was proof enough of what humans could build when driven by necessity, and that if necessity demanded it again, There would be more. The seer nodded slowly, for he had already seen that truth in the silence of the human delegation. The bone-plated general rose once more, not with the same anger as before, but with the steady dignity of a warrior. He asked if humanity would fight only for itself, or if it would stand for others too. The ambassador answered, with no hesitation. He said that the Terran ship was not only a fortress for humans, but a shield for all eyes. He said humanity believed that the measure of strength was not how much one could take, but how much one could protect. He said that any empire who chose peace with humanity would find that when enemies came, humanity would not let them stand alone. The general bowed his head slightly, for warriors respected shields as much as they respected blades. The priest of the eternal flame finally spoke, in a voice quieter than prayer. He asked what humanity would leave behind when its warships were gone, what mark they wished the galaxy to remember. The ambassador closed his eyes for a breath and then answered. He said humanity wished to be remembered, not for the size of its ships or the fire of its cannons, but for the bridges it built, for the children who grew without fear, for the voices that could sing in peace without being silenced by conquest. He said the Terran ship was the shadow that made those dreams possible, a shadow heavy enough to keep predators away. The priest looked down at his relic and whispered that perhaps faith itself had just found a new path. The council chair then rose, ancient and wise, and asked for silence. He turned to the gathered leaders and said that he had lived through many ages, seen many ships, heard many boasts, but never had he seen a power so quiet and yet so absolute. He said the choice was simple, not because the humans demanded it, but because reality itself demanded it. Either the empires could cling to their pride and risk ruin, or they could accept the new balance and walk into a future where humanity stood among them, not as prey, not as fools, but as equals. The chair's words echoed through the chamber, and no one dared to rise against them. The ambassador gave his final statement, a line that would be repeated in halls and ships and homes across the galaxy for generations. He said that humanity did not come to claim thrones or scatter crowns. He said they came to stand, and standing was enough. He said that from this night forward, no one would laugh at humanity's place in the stars, for laughter had been replaced with truth, and truth was stronger than pride. The Terran warship outside drifted in silence, its vast body unmoving, yet louder than 1,000 roars. And the chamber understood the message. Humanity had spoken, and the galaxy would remember. Asterisk. The chamber did not break into applause, nor into cheers, nor into cries of fear. It ended in silence, a silence so deep that even the hum of the station seemed to pause. Outside, the Terran warship drifted in calm rotation, a mountain of steel and light whose presence carried more than victory. It carried permanence. The 5 empires that had mocked and roared now lowered their eyes, each one knowing that the galaxy had turned a corner it could never return from. For what they had seen was not just a ship, not just a weapon, but a declaration carved into the fabric of the stars. Humanity was here, and humanity was not to be forgotten. The scaled commander was the first to rise, not with bluster, but with weariness. He admitted in a voice low and grudging that the Serpent Fang's firepower looked like a candle beside the Terran vessel's shadow. He did not call himself defeated, but he did not need to. The world had seen it for him. The furred warlord followed, shoulders heavy, and though pride still lingered in his eyes, he no longer spoke of crushing planets or ending fleets. He only muttered that perhaps the Iron Fang had found a rival it could never outrun. The silver-skinned seer closed his glowing eyes and whispered that the future had rewritten itself tonight, and that every prophecy from this point forward would need new words. The bone-plated general did not roar, did not hiss, but only bowed his head once in a gesture no one in his empire had seen in centuries. The priest of the eternal flame gripped his relic and whispered prayers of humility instead of supremacy, words his followers had not heard in generations. The ambassador stood tall and did not smile. He had not come to gloat. And so he only gave the chamber one last message. He told them that the Terran ship would leave in peace, carrying the memory of this meeting with it. He told them that humanity sought no tribute, only trust, and that the galaxy's future was larger than war. He told them that if they wished to test humanity again, they could, but the price would be heavier than they could ever pay. And then he ended with a promise. He promised that wherever humanity stood, they would stand with those who chose peace, but they would not bow to those who chose chains. His voice was calm, and when it faded, no one rose to answer. Outside, the Terran warship slowly pulled away from the Council station, its vast shadow sliding back into the dark ocean of space. For a moment it seemed to take the stars with it, and then the lights returned, but no one in the chamber ever looked at the stars the same way again. The ship left no trail of fire, no roar of engines, only silence. Yet that silence spoke louder than any weapon test or council speech. It told every watching heart that humanity had brought something the galaxy could not measure, something that was not only power but certainty. When the chamber adjourned, the 5 empires departed with heavy steps. Pride bruised but not destroyed. Arrogance shaken but not forgotten. And yet beneath their armor of old habits, each commander carried a new thought they could not escape. They carried the image of a human ship that made their fleets look small. They carried the sound of human voices that had spoken without tremor. They carried the lesson that laughter had been silenced not by destruction, but by patience. And that patience itself was the strongest weapon of all. And so the story passed from that chamber into fleets and homes and academies, whispered by aides, written into secret reports, spread like fire among soldiers who had once believed themselves unbeatable. The tale was told on worlds far and near, that 5 empires had laughed together in pride, and that one human ship had ended their laughter without firing a shot. It became more than a story. It became a warning, and in time it became a legend. Some called it the Night of Silence. Some called it the Turning. But humanity remembered it as the moment they showed the galaxy who they were. For in the end, the legacy was not the size of the ship, nor the fear it inspired. The true legacy was the shift in the galaxy's heart. Where arrogance faltered and respect was born, the Terran warship had sailed away, but it had left behind something stronger than its hull. It had left behind the truth that humanity had come not to kneel, not to conquer, but to stand. And from that night forward, no one ever laughed at humanity again.